The Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful and long-lasting empires in history, enduring for over 600 years and stretching across 3 continents. Yet, the most important and lasting influence it left behind may not be its conquest, its architecture, or even its cultural blending, but its legal system. For much of its rule, the empire was governed not just by military might, but by a legal system grounded in Sharia law alongside imperial decrees and a mixture of military power and bureaucratic law enforcement. The punishments meted out to those who violated these laws, ranging from amputations and floggings to public executions, were more than just tools of governance. They were the very mechanisms through which the empire's rulers maintained order, control, and loyalty. This system of punishment, with its public displays of power and brutal enforcement, didn't just serve as a way to enforce the Sultan's will. It shaped the development of the modern legal systems that emerged in the late 19th and 20th centuries. While many of the Ottoman practices have been abandoned, their influence on the evolution of modern criminal justice is undeniable. The Ottoman legal system was a mixture of Sharia, Qanon, and customary laws. Sharia law governed moral, familial, and personal issues, while Qanon dealt with more secular matters such as land ownership, taxes, and the military. This combination created a dual-layered legal system where divine law and royal decrees shaped the daily lives of the people. But what truly set the Ottoman approach apart was how the punitive measures were enforced, often in brutal public ways, designed not only to punish but also to instruct the population on the consequences of disobedience. The Ottoman Empire's use of punishment was not confined to private courts or the shadows of royal palaces. Public executions, whippings, floggings, and torture were commonplace and conducted in broad daylight, often in central marketplaces or public squares, to ensure maximum visibility. These punishments were a spectacle designed to remind the populace of the Sultan's divine power and the absolute authority of the state. The message was clear. The Sultan ruled not just by consent, but by the fear he could instill in his people. His iron fist was more than a symbol. It was a weapon to ensure obedience. For the Ottoman rulers, punishment was more than just about punishing wrongdoers. It was about maintaining a power structure that controlled every aspect of life, and for the Ottoman sultans, fear was an essential part of that power. Public punishment, especially the imprisonment and execution of high-ranking officials, criminals, and traitors, was used to show that no one, not even those closest to the Sultan, was above the law. The most infamous and severe punishments were often meted out to betrayers, rebels, or political rivals who dared to challenge the Sultan's rule. One of the most brutal forms of punishment was impalement, which became one of the Ottoman Empire's signature methods for executing those deemed political enemies or traitors. This slow, painful death, where the victim would be impaled on a sharp wooden stake, was not only designed to inflict agony but also to humiliate the victim and send a clear message to anyone else who might think of challenging the authority of the empire. Impalement was often done publicly in the central squares of major cities, where the sight of the victim's body left hanging for hours or days would instill terror into anyone watching. But impalement was not the only punishment used by the Ottomans. Beheadings were also common, often carried out swiftly and without mercy. The executioner's sword would be the final word for anyone who had dared to violate the Sultan's law. Yet these beheadings weren't just about the victim's death. They were part of a larger spectacle that was designed to show the Sultan's power over life and death. Executions were always carried out publicly, often in front of large crowds, and sometimes in places like the imperial court, where the elite could observe the consequences of disloyalty firsthand. While these forms of brutal justice may seem harsh, they were effective in maintaining control. The public nature of the punishments, coupled with the severity of the methods, ensured that the population remained in check. Fear kept the common folk obedient, while it also acted as a warning to the elite. No one was above the law. Even the sultan's own family wasn't immune from punishment. The practice of fratricide, where the sultan would kill his own brothers to eliminate potential rivals to the throne, was not uncommon. The sultan's power was so absolute that even the royal family was subject to the same violent justice. The Ottoman approach to punishment influenced the development of modern legal systems in several ways. The use of public executions and the severity of punishments helped to set a precedent for fear-based justice that would be used in later empires. The concept of divine authority dictating legal matters, seen in the Ottoman system of Sharia law, also left its mark on future systems, particularly in Middle Eastern and Islamic countries where Sharia continues to play a role in legal matters. Even though the Ottoman Empire eventually collapsed, its methods of punishment would influence modern-day criminal justice systems, which adopted some of its key ideas about fear as a tool for maintaining social order. As the Ottoman Empire entered the 19th century, it became increasingly clear that the once effective methods of public execution and brutal punishment could no longer be the cornerstone of the Sultan's rule. The Tanzimat reforms, which began in the 1830s, represented a significant shift in the empire's approach to law and punishment. These reforms aimed to modernize the empire's legal system, centralize authority, and adopt Western legal principles in a bid to survive in an era of European dominance. The shift from fear-based justice to more structured, humane practices was not without resistance, but it marked the beginning of the end for the extreme measures of the past. The Tanzimat Fermans of 1839 was a critical first step in the legal transformation of the Ottoman Empire. Sultan Abdülmecid I sought to establish a more equitable legal framework, one that balanced the Ottoman Empire's Islamic roots with modern governance. The Sultan's aim was clear: to build a more structured legal system where laws were codified, publicly available, and fairly enforced. This was a far cry from the old days of arbitrary decrees and brutal punishment carried out without recourse to reason or law. One of the key components of the Tanzimat reforms was the establishment of modern secular courts that would work alongside religious courts. For the first time, Ottoman subjects could expect a fair trial based on codified law, and the Sultan's personal authority was no longer the sole determinant of guilt or innocence. This represented a move away from a system in which the Sultan's word was law and punishments were executed without due process. The idea of legal equality, once foreign to the empire, began to take root. One of the most significant changes in the Ottoman justice system was the abolition of the most extreme forms of punishment. The days of impalement, public executions, and torture were now behind the empire, at least in theory. In place of these methods, the Ottoman state began to embrace more civilized forms of punishment, such as imprisonment, exile, and fines. While capital punishment remained in some cases, it was now carried out with greater restraint, and its use was more regulated. Under the Tanzimat reforms, the modern penal system began to emerge. This was a marked departure from the older system, where punishment was not just a way to address crime, but a spectacle designed to instill fear. Instead of the public humiliation that had once been common, the Ottoman Empire began to adopt a system of incarceration. The first modern prisons were established, designed to house offenders in a controlled, isolated environment away from public view. This change reflected a broader shift in the understanding of punishment from public spectacle to private rehabilitation. But these reforms were not without their challenges. Despite the formal adoption of secular laws and the prohibition of extreme punishments, the Ottoman elite, especially those loyal to the Sultan, continued to use brutal methods in some cases. The Janissary Corps, which had once been the empire's most powerful military force, was disbanded in 1826 after the auspicious incident, but the violence and brutality associated with them didn't entirely disappear. As the Ottoman Empire faced growing pressure from both internal rebellion and external European influence, the use of force still remained an essential tool for maintaining control. Despite the introduction of more humane punishments, torture continued to play a role in certain aspects of Ottoman justice, especially when dealing with political dissent. The rise of the Young Turk movement in the early 20th century, which called for a more democratic Ottoman state, demonstrated how fear still existed at the heart of Ottoman governance. The Sultan's secret police, while now less involved in torture, were still used to suppress dissent, and political prisoners were often subjected to inhumane conditions in prison. One of the major shifts in the Ottoman Empire's punitive measures came with the Young Turk Revolution of 1908, which restored the Constitution of 1876 and led to the abolition of the Sultan's absolute power. The constitutional monarchy that followed sought to replace the absolute rule of the Sultan with a more representative system. This represented a significant shift in the empire's political structure and legal system. The reforms were intended to move the Ottoman Empire closer to the ideals of democracy and justice, aligning it with the more progressive legal systems of Europe. By the time the Ottoman Empire collapsed at the end of World War I, its punitive system had already undergone profound changes. The abolition of the Caliphate in 1924 marked the end of the Ottoman era and the beginning of the Republic of Turkey under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Ataturk's reforms, which included the abolishment of Sharia law and the creation of a secular legal system, fundamentally changed the way justice was administered in Turkey. The transition from Ottoman feudal justice to modern legal frameworks was complete. While the Ottoman Empire's legacy of fear-based justice did not disappear entirely, the legal reforms implemented throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries laid the foundation for the modern legal systems that would develop in Turkey and beyond. The public spectacle of punishment, which had once been a defining feature of Ottoman justice, was replaced by a system of laws and courts aimed at ensuring fairness and due process.